Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Katie Ensweiler. I'm the marketing manager here at Von Lehman CPA and advisory firm. We are recording today's session, so in case you do miss anything, we'll be sending out a link later on today or tomorrow for you to revisit any information you may have missed. Also, if you are joining with us live today, you will be receiving a copy of Anne's presentation. We'll be sending that out with the link as well. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to throw them in the chat box. We have a jam-packed presentation today, but we will try to get to them as best as we can. And before I go any further, I do want to thank our partners, Fraternal Law, and turn it over to Amy for some comments.
Yeah, hi everyone. On behalf of Fraternal Law Partners, I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. And Anne and Von Lehman, we thank you all as well for partnering with us on these wonderful webinars. So we're excited to hear all of Anne's insights, tips, and tricks today.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Amy. And with that, Anne, I will go ahead and turn it over to you for your presentation on Build a Governing Board in 50 minutes.
Terrific. So thank you very much, Katie and Amy, of course. My name is Anne Maxfield. I am delighted to be here. I have occupied the nonprofit space for close to 25 years. And before that, I was in the private sector. So when I transitioned into the nonprofit space, I served in the capacity of executive directors for nonprofits, chief development officer, and presidents for nonprofits. And then what I did was I took those learnings and I decided to open my own consulting firm 9 years ago, and I have not looked back. So what I do is I help nonprofits and associations grow their business, grow their membership through effective strategies, philanthropic strategies, training, governance, and such. So I'm very glad to be here. I'm in 5 states right now, and I have a total of 86 clients throughout these 10 years. So I'm glad to be here. And I have water if I get a frog in my throat. So I need to, let's see here. I need to take that off. There we go. So we will begin. So as you think about building an effective board, boards, they just don't happen overnight. They are carefully crafted. People are carefully, what I call curated, selected, because you want to make sure that you have just the right board. So you have them in the right seat so that your mission moves forward. So as you think about your individual Greek organization and you think about what it is that you do for your members and how you put people on your board, you're doing 4 specific things. You're recruiting, you're going to orient them, train them, and then measure your board effectiveness. So can somebody tell me, this is now when I see if Katie really is paying attention to the chat box. So can somebody tell me what would happen if your nominating committee does not recruit the right person for the right chair at the right time? And if we were in person, I may have prizes, whoever gives me the answer, but we are virtual. So who can tell me what would happen if the nominating committee did not get the right person recruited?
I'm on the chat, Anne. I don't see any answers yet.
All right, so let me tell you what could happen. You could have a board that may be well functioning before the person comes in, and it's not going to be operating at the level. Oh, do I see an answer from someone? Okay, Sean Callan, what was the, somebody said something before Sean.
They said opposite of good, and I think that's a perfect summary.
That's exactly right, because in order to keep the well-oiled machine going, you've got to get the right people in the right spot in the right chair at the right time, and then do those 4 functions: recruit, orient, train, and measure. So very good. Whoever said that.
We had one more comment, solve the work of the organization.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, good. Now we know that people do know how to use their chat box. And now I know that Katie really is monitoring it. So I want you all to know that anytime you put something up there, Katie is monitoring it. I can't see everybody on my screen because you're at the very top and I'm looking at the PowerPoint. So I love feedback. All right, go ahead and advance the slide, please. Recruitment tips. First thing you have to know when you are recruiting somebody, you've got to know your Greek organization. And what I mean by that is you have to know it inside out and backwards. Because if you're recruiting somebody to serve on your board and you're at Starbucks having coffee and you have everything to ask the potential board member questions, and suddenly that person starts asking questions about your respective Greek organization, if you don't have the answer, that looks like you and your role as a board member or on the nominating committee that you don't know your organization. So we want to make sure that as you're starting with recruiting, that you know your organization well, how many members you have, what is your annual operating budget, what is your recruitment process, do you have paid staff? If so, how many? What did your audit look like last year? What's your orientation process? How many meetings does a person have to attend? So you want to know your Greek organization. Secondly, you want to be really transparent about the type of organization you are. So if you're thinking about your governing board and you're thinking about your Greek organization, think in terms, okay, so is our board a governing board that we strictly do policy and we strictly evaluate our executive director and we strictly do strategic planning, we focus on 60,000 feet issues? Or are you an operating board where maybe you might be smaller and maybe you have a part-time paid staff, so that's maybe you're helping that person? Or are you hybrid? And that is you're doing half governance and half operations. So when you are recruiting someone, you need to make sure that they understand this, because if they come on their board and they think you're a governing board and suddenly you ask them, hey, can you do this and can you do that and can you stop in here and can you do me a favor and get with the auditor, call Von Lehman and see if our audit's ready, things like that, they then are stepping into operations. So who can tell me, besides what I just said, why one more piece, why it's critical to be transparent? Anything, Miss Katie?
Nothing quite yet.
Expectations. So they'll know the job they'll be doing. Exactly. Yep. Here's what thank you for both to Scott, and there was somebody right before Scott. Here's what you don't want. You don't want to have a rock star sitting across from you at Starbucks, and then you recruit them to be on your board. It goes on the nominating slate. The slate goes to the executive committee or to your board for approval. You get the person in, you orient the person, you train the person, and then you measure the effectiveness, and suddenly you're telling them it's a governing board, and the next thing you know, they're in an operating role. That's a great way to lose a rock star board member. So here's another tip. Figure out your nominating structure and process. And when you think about that, get a really tight process together. Structure is really important for your board. Some people like things loosey-goosey. Trust me when I say, you do not want loosey-goosey on a nominating process, because you are the fiduciary for your Greek organization, and you don't want just anyone on your board. So figure out a structure and process, make sure everybody buys into that, and then do that process. The next thing to do with recruitment is really recruit your new members with a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. So if that means you have to step back and build a skill set matrix with the kind of skill sets you need and the diversity you need for your Greek organization, then I would do that before you start your next recruitment. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that you have a DEI lens built in to your governing board and your documents, but really it's the skill set matrix. Make sure you use that lens. And DEI is not just color of skin. It is sexual orientation. It is income level. It is where people work. It is education level. So really look at that, because the more diverse minds you bring to your board, the more meaningful and gratifying it's going to be for your members, and that your board members, and that will translate to your overall membership. Any questions about a DEI lens? Because by golly, it really is just that important. All right, here's the next tip. Make sure that when you are at Starbucks, that you walk in there with the right documents. I call them collaterals. So make sure you walk in there with the right documents. You want an application for membership on your board. And if you don't have an application, I would highly encourage that. Again, you're the fiduciary responsibility. Even though I would imagine everyone is insured, you still want to make sure you have necessary applications. What's the position description? So your board, every board member, you should have a general position description to serve on the board, and then each committee, of course, should have their own position description. A roster of board members. When I coach my clients with this, I say, hey, bring in your roster, because if somebody knows somebody on the board, that might strengthen the chance that the person is selected for the board. So you have all the documents, but I want you to do most of the listening and let them do most of the talking. So don't let the documents sell the opportunity. Keep the documents there, so when you're leaving at the end, you say, you know what? It sounds to me like there might be a fit. I can't promise you that the board is going to vote, but we would love to review your application. And then you think about the application, the position description, everything else. So it's those necessary documents. It also makes you look so organized. Discuss the opportunity with the prospect. So discuss that opportunity. Let them know within that 1 hour meeting what it is your expectations are. Goes back to the comment that someone said earlier. Set the expectations before they're even nominated. So that way, if they don't feel that they're a fit, they don't fill out the application. Here's what you don't want to do. And I see this happening in nonprofits. I see it happening in associations. Somebody really wants John Doe on their board. Really wants him on the board, but John Doe really doesn't want to be on the board. But John Doe is, man, he or she, they are given a really hard sell, and they end up going on the board, not wanting to be on the board anyway. Don't do hard sales. Discuss the opportunity like you're having a conversation. And then from there, make the ask and see if it's a fit for them. But it has to be a fit for both of you. Do you have any questions about those pieces for recruitment tips? And if I have left something off that you do in your Greek organization, I would love for you to put that on the chat board so everybody can learn from you. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that if there are things that you do for recruiting that are not on my list. I have lots of tips, but I just kind of boiled it down to maybe the top 7. So use your chat board and let us know if there's something that you do.
I do have one that came in. Do you have examples of a good general board member job description?
Is that person asking me?
Yes.
Oh, of course I do. Nonprofits hire me all the time for document development, and I develop their position descriptions. I develop their officer positions. I develop their committee positions. Yes.
Fabulous. I'll make note of this individual's name. And just so everybody knows, we will send out Anne's contact information. So if you guys have any questions after the event, you can get in touch with her that way as well.
And I'm glad you asked the question, because that position description is the most important tool you have. Any other questions, or does anybody have any other tips to augment my tips? All right, so you're sitting down at Starbucks, you've done everything, you've discussed the opportunity, you have made the ask. Now, that leads us to wait for it. How about changing the slide? new board member orientation. So let's assume that person with whom you had coffee said yes, and that person ended up on your nominating slate. And the board said, yay, we want Anne Maxfield to be on our board. Then what happens next is once that happens, you need to get your new board member oriented as quickly as possible. One of the top 3 reasons rock star board members will just resign from a board, or worse, they'll ghost you. They just won't show up for meetings. They suddenly are not available by email or telephone, is because they've not been oriented correctly. That and the meetings are not structured, and they don't start on time, they don't end on time, and there are people that hijack a board meeting. Those are the top 2 reasons. So as you think about new board member orientation, who can tell me why this is so important? Anybody besides what I just said?
Nothing quite yet. So you know what to do.
Yes, Sean. Sean, if I had like gold stars for you, I would give this to you. So exactly, they need to know what to do, and they need to know who some of the players are. So they need to know who is at the table. They need to meet other people within your Greek organization. So as you think about knowing what to do and how to do it in many ways, because that actually comes next, who do you think should conduct the orientation, and who do you think should attend the orientation? You can tell I like interaction.
The attendance should be full boards and staff leadership team.
All right, Kate Sasha, I hope I pronounced your surname correctly. That is correct. There's only one adjustment that I would make for that cohort, that group. I would have select board members, meaning you will definitely want your chair of the board there. You may want other members of your executive committee. I don't think you necessarily need the full board unless your board is small. Depends on the size of your organization. Definitely need top staff leadership, because they're going to want to be part of the orientation. You're going to want to get, somebody's going to want to design a slide deck, agendas, keep it going, map everything out, because you want this to be as professional as you can from the get-go. So even with the orientation, make sure they get the notification ahead of time, make sure they're going to be there. And depending on the size of your board and your Greek organization, there's nothing wrong to, as you build your board calendar for the year, go ahead and plug 3 of these dates in. So if you go ahead every 4 months, do a new board orientation, when people are out there soliciting, they will know automatically when the orientation is going to take place, as well as when all the board meetings are. Because if we go back to tips, we don't have to go back to tips, Katie, I'm going back in my head to tips. So as you think about that, when you're recruiting someone, if you're trying to recruit me, but I can't attend every board meeting, then I shouldn't be on your board. That way, again, it has some transparency. All right, so you have select board members there, or all board, which is fine too. But of course, the leadership team, what topics should be discussed? I like to look at this as the who, what, when, where, why, how of orientation. That's what I like to look at this. So when you think about topics, you should think about everything about that. Really, what's the staff role in your Greek organization? What's the board's role? Talk about how never the two should connect. So if you're lucky enough to have a large Greek organization where you have an executive director and you may have some operational support and program support, then they just need, the new board members need to understand that they do their job and they have their lanes. So just all kinds of topics, the financials, Again, review their position description. Talk about some policies that you've set recently. And other things that are really germane to your Greek organization, because you want them to be effective and excited just as they get out of the gate. So as you think about what topics should be discussed, then look at where should the orientation take place. If you're lucky enough to be large enough to have an office where you have a staff, that's where I would have it, because that way they can take a tour. They can meet other staff who may not be in the orientation, and they can see the offices for themselves. Again, what you're trying to do is connect them emotionally and connect them in ways to your Greek organization. So they eventually become your #1 cheerleader. They're out there advocating for you. And that's another role of a board member. So how should the content be delivered? It can be discussion. It could be a slide deck like this. I usually recommend slide decks, usually in a boardroom slide deck. And it should just be delivered that way in discussions, but a formal agenda to keep everybody focused. I talked a little bit about what happens if your new members are not oriented. And it could just get bad from there. So if you keep having somebody who can't attend the first orientation, and they can't attend the second orientation, and nobody has time to sit down with them individually, it just makes it uncomfortable. You need to follow a structure and a process. I'm not saying that you can't be Gumby, and I'm not saying that you can't be agile and flexible, but there's some pieces with governance that structure actually works well. So let's hope that you can do that. Before we go on to what happens next, does anybody have any questions around this board member orientation piece at all? Or comments? If we were in person, believe me, I'll bring it out of you.
I don't see anything quite.
All right, in that case, Miss Katie, we are ready to advance to the next slide.
Okay.
All right, so you have recruited, we're going to say you've recruited 3 rock stars, and you managed that meeting at Starbucks brilliantly. Your board voted for it. You had everything together for the board, put it on the nominating slate. The board, as transparent as can be, the board voted the person in, hopefully unanimous. You always want to build consensus and get a unanimous vote, because the #1 reason boards become toxic is if there's 1 or 2 holdouts who do not want a person to be on the board and everyone else does. Sometimes they can make their life a little difficult. So boards can get toxic. I'm not saying that would happen with a nonprofit or a Greek, but it can happen on any board. So you want to work really hard, the nominating chair, the executive committee chair, and the board chair, work really hard to get that unanimous support. So now you've recruited, you've oriented your new 3 people, and now you have to make sure that during the year, not only do you train them, but you train your full board, because you want to start developing them to be operating at a higher level and a higher functioning level. So who can tell me why training is so golly darn important for your governing board? All right, Amy. Yes, that is exactly why. You want everybody to be on the same page. Thank you, Amy. That is so important, because you want the new board members to be in lockstep with the current board members. And so this training becomes a place to where everybody kind of like, sometimes it's a cause for a reset. You've heard that with governing boards, a reset. So the training becomes very important. And as you think about the training, I'm keeping an eye on time. Oh, here's another one, Tracy. You can avoid a lot of pitfalls if they know the business processes and procedures. Oh, Tracy, you are so right with that. Pitfalls like you cannot believe. And that's really important because you never want to have any kind of a wedge between even you and the paid staff, the governing board, and the leadership team. And the training becomes extremely important, again, for the new members, but to pull everybody together to make sure they're on the same page. You all are rocking this. That's marvelous. So as you think about that, you want to think about your trainer. Now, do you want somebody on your board to do the training, or do you want to pull in an external expert to do the training? Or do you want to do a hybrid model? There are actually pros and cons for having a board member do the training, and there are pros and cons to have an external expert do the training. It depends on your budget. It depends on the content that you need. It depends on if things are getting too political on your board. It depends on what the issues are. It depends on how long it's been since you've taken the temperature of your board. So as you think about your Greek organization, why doesn't somebody share with us on the chat board whether you engage external trainers and why, or whether you utilize the talents of your board members and why? Or if you want to speak, that is fine too. Just take your microphone off. Anybody want to take their microphone off and let us know whether you have internal or external trainers and why and how it works for you?
I'll pipe in. We have a combination of both. Some of our board members have gone so far as to take volunteer board classes through an organization called the Board Member Institute. That's had some great participation. They offer actually a certificate program through Northwestern. That's been really fantastic and has helped orient those board members to general board leadership and the job that it is. But when they come to serve on our board, there's also orientation mainly to our organization itself, which we do internally, and consists of, I think, a lot of the topics you've touched on so far, but also the structure of our organization, the people who are involved, what our vision and strategic plan is, what their job as board members are. There are some boards that are very active participants in running the day-to-day, whereas other organizations are staff-driven. And also, I'm a recovering CFO, the financial state of our organization, which I think is a important thing to make sure that the transparency is there from the get-go and those questions are answered right away.
So Rob, this is Rob, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. You're at the top of my screen. You're the only one that doesn't have the microphone. So I just made an assumption that this was you. You are absolutely correct. So when you think of training, you take some of those pieces in from orientation. And yes, there's a lot of things that are covered in orientation. Strat planning is number one, succession plan, all of those pieces. And when you're taking it into the board training so that everyone sees it, that's a great model that you have, Rob. And I want to thank you very much for sharing that with us. Katie, did anybody have any thoughts on the screen while Rob was sharing his thoughts?
Yeah, we actually had two people share. Scott P said for orientation, we've used in-house, but for more specialized training, we've used outsiders. And then Tracy W said both staff for our specific business and consultant for governance and large picture coaching.
That is essentially what most nonprofits and associations do, is they take a hybrid model. For most orientations, it's rare that an external consultant will come in and deliver the content. Now, you may call an external consultant to design a program for you, but not to be there at the meeting. That's always staff and board, so thank you. And then yes, sometimes pull in an external person when you need to, but if you don't need to, that's okay too. So thank you for that. Any other questions before we go into the hot topics that should be talked about at board training? All right, so let's focus first on training a board in terms of the board staff partnership. This to me is very important. So when I used to be a chief development officer, my partner on the board was the development committee chair. So we were literally called the board staff partnership with me and then with Fran Cohen. When I was the executive director for a nonprofit, I was with the American Cancer Society. My staff partnership was with the chair of the board. And then I interfaced with other people and I reported to the board. So when you are looking at your new people that you're training and training, making sure that the people on your board, your current members, are up to speed on everything. And it goes back to what somebody said, being on the same page, which is absolutely right. Everybody has to hear the same thing. You want to make sure that everybody understands and respects those partnerships. Here's what you don't want to happen. Let's say I am the executive director of your Greek organization and I lead a team of 4. What we don't want to happen is that in my board chair staff partnership, that everyone's going around me to staff, that everybody sticks with their partner, not saying they can't converse, not saying anything like that, but there has to be a little structure there. That's why the partnership piece is so important with the board staff partnership, and it has to get off on the ground at the right time. I will say in my 25 years of working for nonprofits, fundraising for nonprofits, serving on boards, many boards, as well as what I do in my business now, I've never had an issue with the board staff partnership, but I've always set people up to succeed. So as you think about this, just remember you're setting things up to succeed with this. The second piece is the governance. So as you think about your Greek organization, as we talked about before, you have governance and you have operations. So the governance piece, this is you want to train everybody, do a reset, if you will, especially if you have new members coming on and going off, and if you've got maybe long-term members that maybe they've been there too long. You ever have that problem happen? That happens. You want to make sure that everybody knows their roles and responsibilities and the role of a governing board. So your role of your governing board, of course, is fiduciary. It is setting the strategic direction for your Greek organization through strategic planning, is evaluating the top paid person on your staff. It is setting policy. It is following the rule of law. Big time. It's all of those pieces. So you have the governance piece, then you have their individual piece. So you want to train them on that. And then of course, operations. That's everything that if you're fortunate enough to have a paid staff, everything that they're doing, that's finances, that's programs, that's everything from facilities maintenance and all of that. But that is what should be discussed at the board training. Now, you may not have time to do all of this in a board meeting. This is going to take time. Think about when you have your annual retreats. Don't discount the fact that you couldn't pull somebody in to do a little training as a portion of your annual retreat. Just a thought. All right, any questions about topics? So when you think governance and operations, pretty much everything's covered. All right, so the next one is, what happens if your new members are not properly trained? So I'm going to go straight into the next slide. If you can advance the slide. If they are not trained, and if you don't have the right people in the right chair, frankly, your board could suffer from this. Your Greek organization may not be as effective as you want them to be. So when you think about board effectiveness, when a board's effective, the nonprofit is effective. I am really big on board effectiveness and tools and measuring a board's effectiveness. Who can tell me right now, who's brave enough to take their microphone off and tell me about the last time that your board, that someone conducted a board assessment? Who can talk about that? And tell us how it ended up and how it started. When is the last time you assessed your board for board effectiveness? So all right, here we go. I see something popping up on my screen from Ashley. You do quarterly self-assessments. Love that. That is awesome, Ashley. Do you ask the same? Ashley, could you do me a favor and turn your mic on?
Absolutely, Anne.
Thank you very much. Do you ask the same questions each time?
We do. Same rating scale. It's an online, super easy Survey Monkey. That way we've got consistent comparison from quarter to quarter, and our board governance committee chair comes to the board meeting and reports out the following month.
That is marvelous. How many people are on your board, Ashley?
8.
So you have 8 people on your board. What is your operating budget?
$500,000.
Wonderful. Okay, so that's a good size Greek organization. So as you think about those quarterly Survey Monkeys that are issued, at what point, and maybe this hasn't happened, that you look at that report and say, yikes, we need to do this, or we need to do that, or maybe we need to change this so we can have a more effective board or some more people participate? How often do you do that? Only if it's warranted?
It is when it's warranted, but there's the committee has a, I think it's if you rate something below a 3.5, you have to give an explanation. And if there are enough of those, then there's a larger discussion that's taking place. And we've had that a couple of times.
So I will say publicly, Ashley Bird is a best practice.
So I inherited it. I appreciate that. We'll give that to AOPI. But there are lots of other things like new board member orientation that we haven't even started yet. So we also have room to grow, but thank you.
Well, I'm so glad you're on this Zoom training then, because now hopefully I have inspired you a little bit to help you understand the efficacy of a new member orientation and given you some nuggets there. So Ashley, thank you very much for sharing that with us. As I was looking, because Ashley's right now under my camera, her name is, I did see at the bottom, my peripheral vision, that some people had some comments. Katie, could you read those to us, please?
Yeah, it looks like there was one right after Ashley's, and it was annually, internally, but we do an external review every 5 years.
That's marvelous. Thank you. Or were there any other comments?
No, that was all.
All right. So I hope you can see just how important the tools are. So you want to look at 2 pieces. You want to do an individual self-assessment, because typically when you do an individual self-assessment, like Ashley does, and she does it 4 times a year, the collective results ends up for board effectiveness. So there's usually a direct, I'm looking for a word, there's a correlation. There's a direct correlation when there are happy campers, 8 happy camper board members for Ashley's Greek organization, that usually translates into the collective board assessment that you have a well-functioning board. Some nonprofits do a separate collective board assessment, so they may look at other kinds of questions, because individuals assessments they may say, like, how many board members or how many board meetings do you attend a year? If you don't attend a meeting, why would that be? So they're asking a little bit more, and sometimes with board assessments, they can ask a little bit more broader issues. So those are the 2 measurement tools. And Survey Monkey, I have to say, Ashley, I love Survey Monkey, and whenever I work for a board, that's the tool that I use, unless they're having, frankly, unless they're having problems. And if I'm told that it's a toxic situation, then I do one-on-one interviews. During the pandemic, then obviously it was Zoom. So thank you for that. Anything else for board effectiveness? So the last question is, I need to turn to my notes. Why do this? And I think we've already talked about this, why you measure your board, because when you have a happy, productive board, that means your Greek organization is going to be very effective. You will create impact because it is all about community impact. It's all about your brand, what you do, and who you are and what you do for your members, so that they are doing their philanthropic business and they're learning from your respective Greek organization. We are, for any other general questions, we are finished about 15 minutes early, and usually this takes a good 50 minutes, but it is tough not being in person. I think we'd have a lot more discussion if we were in person, and maybe next year we can do that. Does anybody have anything you want to take off your mic? You want to talk about something that you've done where we can learn from you that's a best practice? Well, I have just touched the surface with this. Usually each one of these areas, the recruitment, the orientation, the training, and the effectiveness takes about an hour per content. So I've boiled everything down. Oh, it looks like Sean. Thank you, Sean. For small organizations, is there a way to scale back these various tasks? Yes. So Sean, are you comfortable taking your mic off and that we can hear a little bit more about your question? Because that's when you utilize your board members and your staff. And Sean, if you could take your mic. Oh, okay. So now your mic's on. Let's see if we can hear you. Okay, Sean, I think, okay. So Katie, can you read Sean's question again, please?
Absolutely. For small organizations, is there a way to scale these various tasks back?
Yes, for small organizations, Sean, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I would imagine that most of the Greek organizations don't have major staff. There is a way that you scale them back. Some you can do on an as-needed basis. That is the first piece. The second piece is you can have board members leverage their relationships with other people who might be able to take some of these pieces, also pay for it. It'd be what I call free unpaid consulting. And then they could own these pieces of the recruitment, the orientation, the training, and the effectiveness. But yes, you can always scale it back, just like you can scale it up. But it just really determines, Sean, it really is just based on the needs of your unique board and your unique board situation. That's what it depends on. I don't know whether that answered your question, but yes, you can scale it down. Just have to be creative with it, Sean. Did that answer your question, or probably not as much as you would want it? I wish that we could hear you. Because we can see you and we see that you have the mutes off, so we should be able to hear you. Do you have something in your computer that's maybe in a headset or Bluetooth? Okay. Sean, I'll tell you what, since you couldn't communicate, when you get my contact information, shoot me an email or call me. All right. Any other questions? All right, so we started about 12:05. We talked about the 4 aspects of building a highly functional governing board, and that is recruiting the right people. You want to get the right people in the right seat at the right time. We also talked about then the value and the need for orientation. So once you've got the right person, you have to orient them so they stick with your board. And then you're looking at training. Everybody needs to be on the same page all at the same time. And that way too, you build a highly functional board versus a toxic board. And then we talked about board effectiveness, the value of the individual assessments, how that leads to collective, using these tools for training, using these tools to measure the effectiveness, and using the tools as discussion points within the board. So I want to thank everyone for your participation. I'm sorry that we could not hear Sean, but I want to thank all of you. Keep doing what you're doing for your respective Greek organizations. I was never fortunate to join a sorority. Don't know whether I was quite the fit, but I went to a Northern Kentucky University where I have my grade and my degree, and I love Northern Kentucky University, but I was a commuter. So usually back then, it was the people who commuted that joined the fraternities and the sororities. So I love what you do. I did some research on the Greek organization, so keep doing what you're doing. So it was my pleasure. Katie, I'm going to turn this over right back to you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate the time you took to prepare and the time you spent with us today. Thank you to our attendees for participating as well. Lastly, we are going to hear from Amy from Fraternal Law one last time before we send you guys out for the day. Amy, are you still on?
I am, and it won't let me turn on my camera, but I wanted to thank you, Anne, and thank you all again. Having not only good people on the board, but also those good procedures and practices make our lives as attorneys a whole lot easier. So we appreciate your insights. And just one last little plug, our Fraternal Law Conference this year is November 3rd and 4th here in Cincinnati, Ohio. We're back in person, so we're excited and hope to see you all there.
And Amy, when I send the follow-up email, I will send the link to the webpage for people to get some more information and go ahead and register if they're able to do so.
That's perfect. Thanks, Katie.
Awesome. Of course. All right. Well, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Like I said, anybody that attended live today during the session will receive a copy of the PowerPoint, and everyone will receive Anne's contact information. Have a good Wednesday and a good rest of your week. Thanks again.